This week on the Deep Leadership Podcast.
You make an impact just by walking into a room.
Yes.
So make good choices about the impact that you have on other people. So that's that third layer, that's regulation of behavior. If you go into a room and everybody goes, then you need to have a real think about what you want to do next. You've got to make a very conscious choice about how you're going to behave next time.
This episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, the official coffee of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Salty Sailor is a veteran-owned coffee brand on a mission to deliver premium, fresh roasted coffee while making a positive impact in the world. Their motto is drink coffee and do good, which reflects their commitment to making amazing coffee and actively supporting the military community. 10% of every order goes to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, an organization dedicated to helping sailors, Marines, and their families in times of need. All our listeners get 10% off every order of their amazing coffee by using the discount code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at saltysailorcoffee.com. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. Nia Thomas. Nia is an academically awarded thought leader in self-aware leadership and practices self-aware leadership every single day in her role as a director of a children's charity. Nia spent 25 years working in the public sector across local government, the NHS, civil service, and in the last few years, the charitable sector in Wales and England. She is a frequent blog writer and a passionate podcast host of the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, of which I had the opportunity to be a guest on. So Nia is the author of a brand new book called The Self-Awareness Superhighway. Now, I wanted to get her on the show to learn more about the importance of self-awareness in leadership. So Nia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to talk to you.
It is so great to have you on the show, and congratulations on this book, first off. And it's so exciting. I think you said you're in the 4th month of the launch. Is that right?
Yes, just heading out to the 4th month. So yes, it's still very new.
That's fantastic. And, before we press record, I mentioned that, although we haven't covered self-awareness directly on the show, just about every episode, we end up talking about self-awareness and it being a challenge for leaders. So I'm so glad to have you on the show to kind of focus in on this particular issue. But first of all, let's get started off to understand some terminology. What in your definition is self-awareness and why is it so important?
So for me, self-awareness has got 3 layers, and watchers and listeners, you've probably heard a 2-layer definition of self-awareness. But when I was doing my research for self-awareness, it became apparent to me that there is an internal and an external, but then there's something in the middle that joins it. So for me, I talk about reflection of your hard skills and relational skills, recognition of your impact, that's that little piece in the middle, and then regulation of your behavior. And I'm very deliberate about using relational skills. So when we talk about hard skills, often you have people who talk about soft skills. And for me, soft skills doesn't really convey what we're talking about, because I think those softer skills or those unseen skills are the ones that are the most difficult to acquire, the most difficult to master. And I think we're mastering them all day, every day. So mine is this 3-layer definition, but it's quite interesting. So something I do on my podcast quite frequently is ask other people to define it for me, because I
Hmm.
don't think there is one clear definition. I think people have different ideas. Other people think of self-awareness as the introspection part, but for me, self-awareness is not something that you can do on your own. So reflection is just one part of it, and really you need that interaction with other people to be able to understand how you are perceived in the world. So when I talk about my academic definition, I refer to self-awareness as being socially constructed. And that is, you can't construct it in an empty room. So if you're just by yourself in an empty room and you're reflective, that is simply introspection. So as we are social beings and social animals, it's that other part for me that creates this real 360 view of the self, which for me describes self-awareness.
That is interesting that you define it that way. And I just want to ask one question, kind of a follow-up question. Because you're saying it's socially constructed, in other words, it's a reflection on the people around you as well. How does empathy play a part in self-awareness? In other words, because I've noticed that people who are not very self-aware tend to have they tend to not have the empathy to notice what's happening around them. Like everybody reacting to their things they say and things they do, and they're like they don't actually see what's happening. They don't sense the emotions of everyone else in the room. Is that, are they related? I just curious.
Definitely. So when we're talking about that middle layer, that recognition of your impact, that really means that you need to be tapping into your empathy, and your antennae needs to be switched on to really understand what your impact is. And then that outer layer, that regulation of your behavior, if you understand how you are impacting others and you have empathy as towards those individuals, and you also have to have understanding of your audience and the people that you're in relation with, you can then make conscious decisions about the behavior that you want to change. Or maybe you're making a decision that that behavior isn't going to change because you've made a conscious decision about whether you're going to tap into your empathy. But one of the things that I find really important with self-awareness, it's about whatever behavior we are tapping into or we're leaning into at a particular time, that we're doing it from a place of awareness and choice. Because we, as you mentioned, those kind of individuals who are just throwing their behaviors out into the world, and not really realizing or caring how that behavior is landing with others, those have such a huge impact on the people that we are with. And that is so important for us to bring that back to that awareness so that we can bring that back into our reflection. So I think when I talk about the three layers, I think we're moving in and out of those three layers all of the time.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, why did you choose to write about self-awareness? Why was that a topic you felt passionate enough to get this book into print and get it out to everyone?
So I don't think I was really looking at self-awareness. So I had some experiences in the world of work. Some were positive, some were really painful and negative. But there were a couple of different experiences, and I kept coming back to them and very aware that they were different, they were positive, they were negative. But because I kept coming back to them, I was thinking there has to be some commonality here in terms of my interest that I keep going back to. And I discovered that it was behavior, it was relationships, it was hierarchy, and the question of, do these people have an idea about the impact that they have on others?
Yeah,
So I put all of that together, always knew I wanted to go back and do a bit more study. So I started my doctorate and started exploring these different things. And really, the definition found me, because when I started exploring this idea of, do people know the impact that they have on others? Well, there's a group of studies called the Self Others Rating Studies, which is I rate me, you rate me.
hmm,
And there's that discussion then about that impact. And through that, the terminology of self-awareness started to rise up. And I thought, that's what it's called. It's going to be self-awareness. When I started researching, it was self-awareness, leader effectiveness, and leadership at all levels. And as time has gone on, it's affectionately now known as self-aware leadership.
that makes a lot of sense. So it's interesting. So it's interesting how our life experiences sort of point us in certain directions. Almost everyone I've talked to on this podcast, their passion came out of their experiences, right? Something can, they maybe had gone down one road and they learned some things and they said, this is not, I want to research this more. I want to be, this is my life's mission. And so it's interesting how we we find that mission. We don't necessarily set off on the mission. I'm an engineer. My undergrad is in engineering, and suddenly now I'm studying leadership and teaching leadership, and it's just, how did I end up here? Well, I found something I was passionate about, something that really resonated with me, and it sounds like you had the same situation.
Yeah, definitely. And like you say, I think it finds you when you have
Yeah.
all of these different interests and then you start to weave them together. You end up going down a route and you think, actually, that's the way I was supposed to be headed.
Yeah, interesting. Every twisted road kind of leads to where you're supposed to be. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
Interesting. So so let's just, as we build our self-awareness as a leader, how does it, or even just as a person, how does it help us with our relationships, maybe within the family, and then maybe with our business relationships? So how does self-awareness help relationships?
I think by being aware of the impact that we have on others, we can make that conscious choice of, do we say this thing? Do we not say this thing? Do we behave in a particular way? Do we behave differently towards one person, towards another?
Mm,
And I think that constant moving in and out of those three layers of self awareness helps us to judge a situation so that we are best able to communicate, we're best able to relate to those individuals. And as you mentioned, we get better at self awareness. I think there are days when we're really self aware, and there are days when we are really not self aware. So, one of the reasons why I called my book The Self Awareness Superhighway is because I think self awareness is a journey that we are very effective, and then we have a crisis or we have lots of stress and we become less self aware. So I think in terms of relationships, as much of it is about our own behavior as the impact that we have on others. But when you look further than that, you think about your reputation and you think about the shadows that we create as leaders. And one of
mm,
my podcast guests, she used the phrase of, as leaders, we create long shadows. And I'd never heard that before, but I use it very frequently now because I really think that we do. And when we have interactions with our direct reports, that impacts their direct reports and theirs. So our shadow really does cast a long way. So I think when we are self aware, we are open to what we don't know, we are seeking
mm,
feedback from our colleagues. I think that really creates a culture in an organization, and it opens up people for development opportunities because they are able to be more open, they're able to be more vulnerable. So I think in terms of relationships, it's essential. But just because we know about it doesn't mean we're good at it. And we might be
mm.
better today than we are tomorrow.
That makes a lot of sense. We were just talking about the ability to learn from others, just to reflect. It sounds like there's a touch of humility there, which is I don't have all the answers, and I'm open to learning from others about how to be better at the role that I'm in. And there, that to me sounds like a touch of humility. Is that a does that play a part in this as well?
Absolutely. So it's the second direction of my self awareness compass. So the self awareness compass has got 9 directions, and humility is the second. So, yes, most definitely. I think if you want to be self aware, there has to be a part of you that wants to learn both about yourself. So, you want to learn about your relational skills and you want to learn about your hard skills. But you have to have that humility and that vulnerability and that interest in experiential learning to be able to move yourself forward to say, actually, I'm not very good at this, but I want to learn and I want to improve. So, yes, humility is right up there at the top.
I love it. I definitely hear it, and I just the way you talk about it, it sounds like you have to have a touch of that to be able to get, to learn from others and to learn and to be open to, criticism or open to feedback. And that takes a little bit of like lowering your guard to
Yes.
say, I'm willing to listen to this, even if I don't like what I'm hearing.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
and certainly feedback is not always easy, and that's something that I do talk about. When I started talking about self-awareness, I used to talk a lot about the definition. I was really excited about the definition, and of course, people will always ask the question, "Well, how do I develop my self-awareness? How do
Mm,
I become more self-aware?" So I really started paying more attention to how people were developing their self-awareness, what I'd learned through my research, and seeking feedback, or I prefer feed forward because I think it's more constructive.
mm,
Feedback is really difficult because I think as leaders we potentially create echo chambers. We have filtered feedback because people don't want to offend the boss, especially if we're the ones that are paying people salaries, and
yeah.
redundancies are down to us. So I think that that does have an impact.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. A lot of feed forward instead of
Yes.
feedback. I like
So
that.
feed forward is something that I think it's Marshall Goldsmith, or certainly Tasha Eurich talks about it. And I've done it once or twice with my team. So feed forward is about asking, what can you do next? Because the challenge with feedback is, well, you can't really change it. It's been, it's gone, it's done. When you ask the question, was I any good? And somebody says, well, really, no. What do you do with that answer? But if you ask the question of feed forward, what could I do differently next time? What could I do more of? What could I do less of? You've got something constructive. And if you have a manager who's supportive, you can make that part of an action plan with that manager and ask them to hold you accountable to doing things differently next time. So I think feed forward is far more constructive than feedback.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, I've not heard the term, but just the way you explain it, it seems like it is, you're less defensive when you're talking about the future
Yes,
versus the past, right? You
yes,
always
definitely.
interrupt me. It's like, it's like, oh, it's like then you feel yourself, get, wanting to argue and want to
Yes,
defend yourself, right? But when you're talking about, moving forward, it's less of defensiveness and more about, how can we move forward together in a better way. So I really like that.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it is far more constructive because certainly people have asked me about feedback and I'm really poor at receiving feedback. I will hold my hands up. Yeah, I know about self-awareness doesn't mean I'm good at it or good at receiving feedback.
Right.
Feedback can really sting. And lots of people are not confident in giving feedback, and sometimes we get it wrong and we fumble our words and we don't get out the words that we really would want to say if we'd practiced. Or so I think feedback is difficult to give and it's difficult to receive as well. But I think the more that we build our awareness of our behavior, we get to understand how we need to hear feedback and what we do with it. And then we have that opportunity to say, actually, I need to flip this so that it becomes feed forward, because then
Mhm.
I have something constructive. And when it's constructive, it doesn't sting as much. Exactly what you said.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. That's something I think it's something I can apply today, even in my job as running a manufacturing plant. Is far instead of criticizing someone for what they did, to say next time we do this, let's do it this way. Because it's more efficient, and here's the reasons why, versus criticizing them for the work they did in the past. I like that a lot. It's very powerful. Just a shift of a phrase, but
Yes,
it's you can see where that has really good application. So
definitely.
as leaders develop self-awareness or become more self-aware, how will that help them in to become better leaders, essentially?
I think it does help you understand your audience, and I say audience with a very capital A, because I think as leaders we interact with stakeholders, customers, our direct reports. We are interacting with different people with different agendas at any particular time. So I think that awareness of self means that you understand how you behave in different situations. Are you overwhelmed when it's too busy? Are you somebody who likes to go to the party for an hour and a half and then come home? Or are you happy in that situation for 5 hours? Do you know? Do you understand your behavior? What happens when you're stressed? Do you know if your breathing rate increases? What happens when your heart rate increases? What happens when you're hungry? So all of those things, those physiological things, those very simple things, let alone the more complex situations that we find ourselves in between organizations and companies, I think we have to know ourselves well enough to be able to function in those different situations. Because as leaders, we move in different circles and we have to be different people at different times. That also links with authenticity. So authenticity is also one of the directions of the self-awareness compass, and my view is that we have to really go back to our core beliefs. It's not a superficial idea about. In my book, I talk about it's not about wearing the sequin jacket to work that you go out clubbing on a Saturday night into work on a Tuesday morning. It's about something more core to your ideas, beliefs, values, principles. So I think you need to understand all of those things to be able to operate appropriately and authentically in those different arenas. But of course, it does have to be appropriate. So you have to know yourself well enough to be able to operate in the authentic self at that particular moment in time.
Yeah, it's interesting because what I hear you saying is that we have to know ourselves in terms of what is it that we stand for, what is really important to us. But we also, in a way, when we're in social circumstances, we sort of adjust to the social circumstances to get the most impact from that social circumstance. In other words, we don't change our core, but we adopt the right tone or the right approach when we're with different groups of people. And like for example, when I'm with customers, I'm acting slightly different than I am with my employees than maybe I am with my children, you know. But I still believe have some core beliefs that are important to me. And so it may my approach might be differently depending on my audience, but the core never changes. That what I'm am I catching that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good way of describing it, that your core never changes, but actually we can be 100 different selves because we are complex beings and our behavior in one situation will change to another. But that doesn't mean that we let go of our core beliefs and our core principles to be able to do that, because we will still, if we think that caring is very important, we don't give that up when we are in different situations, but how we show it will be different, because it's just not appropriate to be hugging your colleagues like you would be hugging your kids.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. You know, it's funny because like we in the United States have a very polarized political process, right? So you bring up anything politics nowadays, it's like you're going to get a reaction one way or the other, right? And
Mhm.
so that's a great example of where, like to me, I'm 99% apolitical all the time, only because it's such a hot button issue for so many people. And if my goal was to build a world with better bosses, right, then my political beliefs are going to hurt that. So whatever I have for political beliefs, those are tucked deep inside me because I'm on a mission to do something, and I don't want that to, adversely affect that mission. So I don't know if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that those behaviors, certainly when we are leading, they have to transcend certain things, such as different political beliefs or different neurodiversities within our
Right.
organization. We have to be able to still go back to our core beliefs to be able to behave appropriately in that situation, because otherwise we're not really leading and we're not doing it effectively to the people that are in our care at that time.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's important that we have to care for everyone that's under our charge, regardless of where their political beliefs are. And if you or your religious beliefs or what have you, if you expound, I think if you spend a lot of time talking about them, and you're going to isolate certain people in your organization. I think that's, as a leader, we have to be careful. We have to make sure that everyone feels welcome to be part of our team.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely. And
that's
care is the first direction of the self-awareness compass.
Yes. Okay. I love it. So a lot of good points on this compass. So
Indeed.
so what are some practical steps? So listeners might be saying, okay, self-awareness is important. I can see where it can really help me in my role as a leader and my role as a human being. How do I get started? I mean, where do I get started in developing better self-awareness skills?
Well, something that I like to talk about, which is quite fundamental, and I know a lot of people are still not bought into when they think it's a bit woo-woo, but I think mindfulness is very helpful,
Mm,
because, as I mentioned earlier, the physiological impact that stress has on us. Do we know what happens? Do we know that our breathing becomes faster? Do we know that maybe our blood pressure increases? All of that impacts the way that we behave towards others. So, actually, if you're new to self awareness, being able to sit in a chair and to hear your own breathing, is it fast? Is it slow? Is it faster than when I got into the office? Is it now faster because I've had a coffee? To be able to understand what happens to your body in particular situations. So, if you want to move on to something that is more linked to feed forward, something that I've done, which is really, really simple. I've been in a meeting where I wrote down three words to exemplify the behavior that I'd demonstrated. So, in this particular meeting, I presented a paper. So, I wrote down three words, whatever they were. They were confident, knowledgeable, and probably something else. And I asked three people in that meeting. So I caught up with them afterwards and said, could you give me three words? So they were somebody I worked very closely with and two people that I didn't work so closely with. And they came back with three words. And it was quite interesting. Two of those individuals had similar words to what I had. And a third came up with another word that was different but positive. So for me, the proximity between those words was what was of interest to me. So, when you are considering self awareness, if you have an opinion of yourself and others do not have that similar opinion,
mm,
that is where you want to start asking questions about how far away is my self-awareness from others' awareness of me.
Mm,
So it's about doing these simple things that you can discover what other people are thinking. So you can ask a feed forward questionnaire. I've also asked colleagues those very questions that I shared earlier. So could I do something differently? Could I do something more? Could I do something less? And I've put that out as an anonymous survey that was very helpful to me. I had some really helpful feedback. Then, of course, you've got 360-degree assessments if you have an organization who's willing to support you and fund. But I think if you're doing a 360 assessment, make sure that you use somebody who is accredited and that your organization ensures that you have an intermediary essentially that can facilitate a 360 assessment. I've worked in an organization where a 360 was done simply between the manager and the individuals that they chose. And I'm sure you can imagine that all of the feedback was glowing,
right.
because if you identify who the individuals are and people might not have been felt safe enough to speak up, everything is going to be 10 out of 10. So I think if you're going to do a 360, make sure that it's appropriately facilitated. So I think there are different tools, different techniques that we can think about. But if you are new to this, start with something as simple as listening to your own breathing, observing how you are responded to and perceived in an organization. If you have somebody in your organization that you consider a trusted colleague, ask them some questions about I delivered a presentation, or delivered a difficult message to the team last week. How do you think I did? Do you think the language I use is appropriate? Should I use different language next time? How did the team respond after I'd left the room? Do they want to talk to me? Do they feel that I'm approachable? So I think it's also important to be able to identify those trusted colleagues and be careful who you ask that feedback from, because, as we always say, hate is going to hate. So
Mm.
if you ask the wrong people the wrong questions, they're going to give you feedback that is really going to sting, and it's not going to be constructive. So ask the people who can give you constructive feedback. So in part 3 of my book is all about how do you develop these skills through these different tests, tools, and assessments. So that's just a range of a few.
That makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that you said, which really stood out to me, which was if there's a gap between how you see yourself and how others see you, then that's really where there's work to be done,
Yeah.
and what's interesting is that, one of the questions I ask sometimes on Twitter or X is I'll say, do bad bosses even know they're bad? And the answers to that is usually no or maybe, and they're just doing it to spite, or whatever. But what often, and I had a guest on the show, and I can't remember who said it, but that most people don't get up every morning and want to do bad things. They want to do good things. They want to move their company forward, but sometimes they don't know the long shadow they cast, and it's very dark. And they I always talk about leaders who leave problems in their wake, right? Everything is a disaster everywhere they go, and some leaders may not even know that they're doing it, and I think that's where this is helpful, which is you need to get the feedback from others. You have to see how others perceive you, otherwise you just continue creating problems everywhere you go, and you're not really aware of the impact you're making in others.
Yes. And sometimes it takes that brave voice to be the first person to have ever told you that
Yes.
this thing is very offensive to people. Somebody has to go first. And I think that's a challenge, that there has to be somebody that brave that has to have the conversation with you. Because the alternative is, I talk about it in terms of a juggernaut. Unless you're going to be asking for feedback, that juggernaut is coming at you anyway. And the first time you might hear about it is when you're in a disciplinary, or when the organization is having to put formal procedures in place. So be that one that asks for feedback, because you want to be able to ask for it before it comes at you, and you're told what your challenges are.
Interesting. Let me ask you this question. I know I had a student one time ask me, how do I know if I'm a good leader? And my answer, just as off the cuff, is I said, if you walk into a room and everyone goes silent, all your employees go silent when you walk in, you probably have some work to do. But if they walk in and everyone's like, "Oh, hey, Nia, great to see you. I want to show you what we're working on," and they embrace you and they want to talk about the business or talk about the things they're working on, there's you can sense it. If you open your eyes to that, you will see the way people react to you when you walk into a room. Is it welcoming, or do people shut down? I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but that was my off the cuff answer, because I've been in those situations where everyone goes silent. I'm like, oh, this is not good. So,
Yeah, definitely. Yes, absolutely. And one of my podcast guests, and it's actually my most popular podcast, is Alison Largier. And I work with Alison, she was one of my first managers ever. And she talked about you make an impact just by walking into a room.
yes.
So make good choices about the impact that you have on other people. So that's that third layer, that's regulation of behavior. If you go into a room and everybody goes, then you need to have a real think about what you want to do next. You've got to make a very conscious choice about how you're going to behave next time.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, this has been really good. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners right now?
Oh, what would I leave with listeners? So maybe it's about raising awareness of awareness. So what I've discovered is that if we talk about self-awareness, we talk more about self-awareness, and people will recognize when we buy a red car, all of a sudden you see red cars everywhere. So let's start talking about self-awareness, because you will then hear somebody talking about it in the kitchen over the coffee machine, or you will start people will use it as an opportunity maybe to start talking to somebody who isn't very self-aware and causes a lot of negativity in a team. So let's raise awareness of awareness. Something that I do after every one of my podcasts is I write a top takeaways review. So there's usually 5 takeaways, and what I really want is for people to pick one of those takeaways and to take it into their team meeting and just talk about it. You don't have to agree with it. You can disagree with it. You can decide you're going to develop an action plan on it, or that it doesn't fit your organization. But let's raise awareness of awareness. So let's keep talking about it.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic way to conclude this discussion about self-awareness, is let's raise awareness of awareness. And I absolutely love that. The book is called the Self-Awareness Superhighway. And is there a book and a workbook? Is that what I understand?
So it's a book and a reflections journal. So
Okay.
when you get into part 3, journaling is something that I talk about, and it actually has a companion journal so that if you want to test that out for yourself, you certainly can. So my book has a quiz so that you can do a self-assessment, and then you can send it on to 3 people who can assess you, and you can have a spider graph that will show you the distance between your feedback and their feedback. So that's one part of it. But in terms of a physical journal, you can also get hold of that to support you to develop your more internal reflection. And again, if you're new to self awareness and you haven't done anything like this before, a journal is great because it's something that you can do yourself and you don't have to show anybody else.
I love it. I love it. I'm so great that you created these resources for leaders and for your readers. I think it's fantastic. So how can our listeners find out more about you, your podcast, which is fantastic, by the way, and this new book?
Everything is accessible via my website, which is knowingselfknowingothers.co.uk or ksko.co.uk. So everything is accessible via that.
Fantastic. And we're going to put links in the show notes for all of Nia's resources. And again, this is such an important topic. We've talked about self-awareness almost every episode, especially when we talk about leaders. We talk about bad leaders and toxic leaders, and a lot of it is a lack of self-awareness. So, listeners, if this is something that is, that you're thinking about, is making you think and making you think, am I really aware of myself and the impact I'm making on others? If you've got some questions, please reach out to Nia. We put the resources here in the show notes for you to be able to reach out to her. She's very accessible. She'll answer your question. Follow her podcast. It's fantastic. I really highly recommend it. I was on it and she asks amazing questions. She's a very thoughtful podcaster and very focused, and she's really good at what she does. So I highly encourage you to listen to that podcast as well. Subscribe, put it on your playlist, and you're going to learn a lot from Nia. So, Nia, I want to thank you for coming on the show,
Thank you.
sharing this important work, and I want to congratulate you on all your success so far.
Thank you very much. And what wonderful feedback.
Well, thank you very much. Feed forward, right?
Indeed.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.